Welcome to the Schmoeville After Show, an after show for all things Schmoes Know and Collider video. I'm your host, Brian Davids, and it sure feels good to be immortalized into Schmoes Know lore, but more on that later as it's time to introduce the newest co-host of the Schmoeville After Show. I'm talking about Aaron the Titan Turner.
Well, Brian, I'm not really inundated in Schmoeville lore at this moment, or Schmoes lore, I apologize, but I did have cauliflower rice for the first time today, and I'm happy to report it's not that bad.
Aaron, I have to ask, everybody wants to know your answer to the following question. How does it feel to finally be on the SK Podcast #1 show?
You know, I was prepared for this question, and I have, I think, what I like to believe is the perfect response, which is, it feels good to be on the Schmoeville After Show. It feels even better to be the highest rated host on the Schmoeville After Show and the SK Podcast channel. Thank you.
So it's everything you hoped it would be. That's what I'm taking away from your response.
I'm living the dream here. I'm like Cinderella at the end of the movie. Everything's gone great for me.
Last week you were on the Falcons. This week you're on the Patriots.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, folks, please make sure to welcome Aaron in the comments and the tweets. Keep in mind, when I joined Snell Job in episode 20 of this show, we didn't know each other at all, but we developed a rhythm and a style, as well as our own jokes and esoteric references. So it won't be long before Aaron and I have our own for-me's and our own tricks. I don't have any tricks, but don't think the classic show bits are going anywhere because they're not. Aaron, listen, you're familiar with the show already. It's a blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try to keep up, okay?
Fantastic. Love the reference.
All right, let's start with movie talk. We're just going to address some overall topics that came up during the week. Instead of going, on Monday, Campia said this, and on Tuesday, Kristian said this, we're just going to address the topics that emerged regardless of the day. Our lead topic, Twitter question follow-up. Last week, we talked about the fact that many fans are upset that a lot of the same Twitter users keep getting their questions read on the air. Well, on Monday, Wendy threw some shade at us as she said that she couldn't see the previous 30 tweets from the first person she selected. She was being sarcastic, of course. I understand why Wendy would be defensive, but the thing is, after all these shows that they've done, you have to be able to recognize, and I'm sure they do, recognize the same names that keep popping up over and over again. Whether it's your Jonathan Peck or your Phil Fang Foom or your whomever, the same names keep popping up. So again, we have a lot of upset fans that tune in every day, live, during the live broadcast, and they just want to have their moment in the sun. So I think it's very important that they take this a bit more than just a casual fan complaint. So, Aaron, where do you weigh in on the Twitter question controversy?
I think once you recognize someone's name, like you said, Phil Fang Foom, Jonathan Peck, I would even throw in No Pants Daniel. The fact that I know these names tells me that it's too much. Now, I'm not saying that they don't ask good questions, but it would be nice to get a different variety of questions for Twitter and for the audience. I think that's a fair compromise. I don't think it's asking too much.
Yeah, there was even another Jonathan Peck question on Wednesday, and I think No Pants Daniel, I think that is someone that is close to Natasha, and if that's true, I mean, someone tipped me off to this. If that's true, that is completely unacceptable. I mean, you cannot be picking favorites, especially people in your own life. But as I said last week, this is the most common complaint we've received, and since this show is meant to be a conduit between the fans and Schmoedown, we have to use our platform to relay this point. I've had a few people tell me that they're considering no longer watching because they feel that this issue isn't being taken seriously. And just to be clear, I don't agree with that last point just because I've been watching the Schmoedown universe in its various forms the last 6 years. And I know for a fact that there's nothing they take more seriously than fan feedback. Last weekend's mailbag, as well as this weekend's mailbag, makes it quite clear that they take fan feedback very seriously. More on that later. And look, Wendy doesn't need me to tell her this. However, I'd mute the usual suspects from the Collider account whenever the same names continue to pop up. I'd pick out some tweets throughout the show, which Wendy does, That way there's less pressure to pick someone once the segment rolls around. That's when these guys are inundating her the most. And like you said, Aaron, these guys are asking good questions. And since their approach has worked so far, I don't blame them for continuing to exploit it. Now on Tuesday, there was more to this Twitter question issue as Campea surprised us all by popping up during the live Twitter question segment. As I am known to do, I like to take credit for things, and I absolutely believe that Campea was doing this in response to the criticism of the live Twitter segment on our show last week. Now, some people might say he just wanted to do his whitewashing bit, and maybe that's partially true, but I think the primary purpose was to reassure fans that they take this issue very seriously and that they are aware of what's being said. Do you see it that way, or is this just me being a narcissistic egomaniac as usual?
I think it could be half and half. I mean, it could have been. John tends to kind of want to take over things a lot of the time, and it doesn't surprise me that he jumped in to take over Twitter questions.
Yeah, you brought up a great point, because John could have addressed the issue head on, but instead he chose to prioritize the joke, the shtick. However, underneath that though, I think this was his way of acknowledging the Twitter question issue without actually specifying on the air why he was doing this. So our second topic kind of relates to this very issue, and this is in regards to email-based mailbag topics. And I've had an issue with email-based mailbag for quite a while because they take up a lot of time. And this show is about moving through a lot of topics in a short amount of time. A lot of times they are running behind schedule, and a lot of times they even have to skip over either the last two topics or skip over the email-based mailbag and get into live Twitter questions. Since they are having these issues with live Twitter questions, I've said this before, but I absolutely think they should cut the email-based mailbag. That way they're able to take more live Twitter questions. That way they're able to reward more of their live audience. And that way you don't run the risk of having upset fans who are sick of hearing Phil Fang Foom and Jonathan Peck and No Pants Daniel and plenty of other people in the process. And look, a lot of these guys who spam Collider's mentions, they are spamming with question after question. A lot of them are trying to build their own brands or their own names, which can be the same thing. Why build someone's name or their brand when there are genuine fans who just want to hear their question read and answered without having some ulterior motive in the process? If a host plays favorites with people in their own life, that's defeating the purpose of this segment. That's why this issue should be prioritized, because there are hardcore fans who tune in live every single day without fail. They should be rewarded, not the guy who's spamming mentions every day across multiple other channels, not just Collider, in effort to further themselves. So if you remove emails, you're able to reward more of the live viewers without slowing the show's momentum down to read a long email when you're already pressed for time by that point. The long emails typically don't get answered to the level they deserve because the responses have to be quick. And this is why Weekend Mailbag exists. So Aaron, where do you stand on email-based mailbag?
I think there's a way that there can be a compromise. You can still do the email questions, and I know you said you're not a fan, and I can respect that. But you could have Dennis or even John come on there and say, all right, well, go ahead and send an email, but don't make it more than 140 characters, just like a Twitter question. Make it short and concise. And don't write a novel, and don't try to put your own opinions in there. It's like, who do you think's going to direct the Batman? Well, I think it's going to be this person because of this. Well, now we've taken up 2 minutes reading your question, and of course, Kristian or Mark or Schnepp are just going to blow through the answer. They'll be like, well, I mean, I don't really care at this point, and we've already talked about that, so we're moving on. So if they could kind of find that compromise, it would be fine. But otherwise, yeah, I tend to agree with you. Let's go to more Twitter questions. Let's get rid of the email questions. It just takes up too much unnecessary time.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've asked people before, like Riley, and he said, well, if we condense them or if we compress them down and we edit them down, then the person will get upset that they spent all this time writing this great email and then we just read part of it. So we kind of feel obligated to read the whole email. However, he also said that if you send in a novel, they're not even going to read it. They're just going to skip to the next one that is within a reasonable amount of words. So fans should know to keep their questions short, but at the same time, the majority of them are still 2 paragraphs and they're still too long for a show that is quick hit, topic after topic. When you want to have this momentum throughout the show, this segment consistently interferes with that momentum and kind of grinds it to a halt. So
yeah, absolutely.
More live Twitter questions makes everybody happier, and it does not affect the momentum of the show as they go from topic to topic. I've said this before, but I think that's the right solution. Will they change it? No, because email-based mailbag has been in place for many, many years. The same format has been in place for the most part for many, many years. And when you have something that works, you're less inclined to make changes to it. And I understand that. I'm a business owner. I am less inclined to make significant changes, even if there is something that could improve the product or service that I put out. But these same issues keep popping up, especially when they have breaking news. When they have breaking news, that makes the show automatically longer, and therefore things get cut later in the episode. So by removing email-based mailbag, you're able to accommodate any breaking news without jeopardizing your desired runtime. You're able to answer more Twitter questions, which rewards your live audience and gives more people the chance to have their name heard on the show. And you maintain your show's momentum without slowing it down to read a long email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on, this isn't really a discussion point, but I get a big kick when John brings up things like Game of Thrones, Westworld, and now Stranger Things. Really insert any popular show. I love when he does this. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of Game of Thrones. I'm not the biggest fan of Stranger Things, but I still enjoy it. So I don't know why I get such a big kick out of it, but I just love how he's basically saying, I know lots of people love this thing, but just so you know, I don't love this thing or even like this thing nearly as much as most people.
Especially his continued strikes at the film Arrival, even after we're past the Academy Award nominations, and he just continues. Anytime Arrival's brought up, he's there to just bury it every single time. Still.
Yeah, I think that became more of a, I'm going to troll everyone, including my own staff, because he was one of the few people that did not like the film. So that's not quite what I'm talking about here, because he does like shows like Game of Thrones. He does like shows like Stranger Things, but he just goes out of his way to qualify where he stands in comparison to everybody else. He doesn't want people to think he is a zealot for Game of Thrones or Stranger Things like a lot of people are. He always has to come in halfway. Campion knows how to get people riled up. He's incredibly gifted at it. And I just find it amusing. That's all. Now, this week on Movie Talk, the cast or the panel experiments continued. Ellis hosted Tuesday's Movie Talk. Perry and Riley flanked him. Perry called it a Mark sandwich. Thursday, we had Miss Movies on as a guest panelist, which is really great for just being a Thursday show. Typically, until the last couple weeks, we've had the same rotation of guys, and I like that they're going out of their way to mix up the panel. Miss Movies worked in a nice Mean Girls reference to start off the show. I'm disappointed that nobody fixed her mic for her, as it was kind of riding a bit too high on her face, but she still did a great job. And then Ellis was a panelist on Friday, which is very unusual. Obviously, he's usually on the road on those days. Aaron, what do you think of all these cast experiments? Do you like the variety these days?
Of course, I absolutely like it. I like to refer to Perry as the Swiss Army knife of Collider Video. You can do anything with Perry. She can be a host, co-host, panelist, behind the scenes, producer, sideline reporter. Perry can do it all. And anytime she shows up, I'm super excited to see her. She always brings fresh energy, whether it's on Movie Talk, Nightmares, anything, especially that Monday Movie Talk. Everybody else seems to kind of be dragging because it's Monday in the morning, but Perry always brings that fresh energy, and I really enjoy it. And it's always good to see Riley pop up on these panels. It's awesome to get these different takes from different personalities. Sometimes it seems like the topics kind of revolve around the same thing, whether it be Ben Affleck and Batman and that whole situation. And it's good to get a take from Riley. It's good to get a take from Brienne. It's good to get a take from Perry. I like to switch up. And on Fridays, which is for the longest time was kind of a movie talk that I, full disclosure, would skip until they started bringing in Roca and Clark Wolf and Perry, and now you said Ellis. So, I mean, it's going to keep me tuning in no matter what, just to see the variety of what happens.
Yeah, I like that they've been bringing in a heavy hitter on most recent Friday episodes, such as Clark, such as Ellis. But you brought up a great point about Perry being a Swiss Army knife. This is how I described Mark Riley when he first joined on at Collider. And really, Ken Knapsack is a Swiss Army knife in his own right, too. But with Riley, when I did an interview with him many, many months ago, he said during his interview at Collider that they literally said, we want you to be the Swiss Army knife of this channel. We want you to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And Perry has clearly become the female equivalent to that, as she's able to fulfill many different roles, wear many different hats. And kind of the same can be said of Wendy. And I think this is just something that John and company, I think this is something that they look for when they hire most people. I think they need people that are able to wear a bunch of different hats, whether it's writing, whether it's hosting, you name it. They want to have versatile people because sometimes they get busy. Sometimes certain people aren't available because they're on a set visit somewhere, or doing a junket, or doing stand-up comedy, or doing a Schmoedown thing. So it's important to have people that can come in and fill any role, just like a utility player in baseball. Quick fact check. Ashley said during this week that she couldn't remember the last time a horror thriller spent 3 weeks at the top of the box office. Perry then chimed in that she thought that The Conjuring was the last one to spend 3 weeks atop the box office. It actually spent only 1 week. Don't Breathe was the last horror thriller that spent 3 weeks atop the box office, much like Split. So just a couple quick points in that regard. This week they also announced they're bringing back an AMC favorite, which is the March Madness Tournament. There are going to be 64 entries this time, and it deals with the greatest movie villains. Aaron, were you a fan during the AMC days when they used to do these March Madness tourneys?
Oh yeah, I absolutely loved it. I love basically any kind of tournament style thing I enjoy, whether it be like a kickboxing Grand Prix, King of the Ring and wrestling, any kind of tournament you can put together is amazing for me. And
for me,
to have movie topics in there, I really enjoyed the superhero movies when they did. I think that was their most recent one they did. I really enjoyed that, and I'm really pumped for the villains one. Even though at 64, I think we're going to be grasping at some straws to fill those slots with 64 different villains.
I'm penciling in the finalists right now. Heath Ledger's Joker and Darth Vader.
Yeah, you're probably on the right track there. I do want to throw in a dark horse that I think should be included, and if it's not included, it's going to be a crime. And I just want to throw out there a shout out to Jason Isaacs from The Patriot, who plays Colonel Tavington, who I think is one of the best villains in cinema history that no one ever talks about. Great movie, great villain.
Yeah, you're right. He is overlooked. And strangely enough, Heath Ledger has something to do with that villain as well. And since Die Hard sponsors the Schmoedown, we can expect Hans Gruber to make it rather far in the bracket, perhaps the final four. But given how superhero and lightsaber heavy this channel is, I think the smart money still has Vader and Ledger's Joker going to the finals. Now, Aaron, this week we saw Collider News function as movie talk clips. So I have to ask you, is Collider News something that you use for breaking news? Would you prefer that they put resources towards the Schmoedown or towards other shows? Would you be okay with Collider News being reduced to just movie talk clips until the next day? In other words, do you want Collider Video to take a step back from breaking news all day?
Full disclosure, I rarely will catch a Collider News segment in case it's something that I didn't know originally and I was thumbing through YouTube, because otherwise I wouldn't know that it's there. It doesn't show up in any kind of my feeds or anything like that, so I would not even know the breaking news was there. And 9 times out of 10, when a Collider news story drops, everybody already knows. It's already been on Hollywood Reporter or Variety, and if you check movie news regularly, you already know about it. So if they did away with it altogether and focus that on the Schmoedown or something else, I would be okay with it, because it doesn't do anything for me anyway.
Again, you made a great point, because a lot of us are following our Twitter feeds all day, and news breaks immediately on Twitter from a variety of sources. And we click, we read, we have all that information already downloaded to our brains. And by the time Collider News shoots a video, adds the analysis from a movie talk panelist, and adds all the bells and whistles, that particular story has kind of become old news because we digest news so quickly in this day and age. So I can wait until the next day when they discuss the story as a panel on Movie Talk or any of the genre shows. So if I have to decide between Collider Nightmares and Collider News, I'm absolutely going to choose Collider Nightmares. So I'm not sure I need Collider Video to be a source of breaking news, especially when Collider.com is also covering those stories instantly.
It just seems a little dated at this point. Like you said, in the era of Twitter, when we can find out things instantly, watching an on-demand video for breaking news is not... It just seems behind the times to me.
Maybe this was a week where they're experimenting with just using Movie Talk for these separate news stories. I don't know, but they are clearly trying to look at other options instead of the existing Collider News. But if this helps to save Collider Nightmares or it helps to launch the pilot episode for Ken getting coffee with Collidarians, then I'm all for it. And this week marked the end of the AMC sponsorship. All those AMC segments such as Rewind and box office predictions that were worked into Movie Talk are no more. The deal with AMC expired, and that's that, as John explained on Mailbag today. So as someone who's been watching since the AMC for Your Consideration days, it's crazy to me that John is no longer synonymous with AMC. He was the AMC guy, just like Bill Simmons was the ESPN sports guy, just like Kristian Harloff was the Schmoes Know movie show guy. Now they're all just guys.
I am not going to miss the Feeling Old segment. I'm not going to miss box office predictions. While they were sort of fun, box office predictions were kind of fun. It just, no one ever kept track of them except for Perry. It just kind of seemed like it would have been a fun thing if you had the same people every time doing it and they kept sort of like a game going.
Yeah, standings.
Yeah, I'm not going to miss it at all.
Yeah, since AMC was a sponsor, those segments were pretty much obligatory. Nobody really seemed to like doing them, let alone watching them. So it's still important to give AMC credit, though. They didn't have to help John transfer the operation elsewhere. They could have made it very difficult for another company like Complex to take over. Most companies would have made him start over from scratch instead of signing over the infrastructure that was previously in AMC's name. So as fans, I think we owe AMC a tremendous amount of gratitude. But Aaron, the times, they are a-changin'.
They absolutely are.
So Aaron, are you ready to discuss Collider behind the scenes and bloopers?
Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it.
So the second episode, the third one hasn't dropped today. We're recording on Saturday. But the second episode basically dealt with Kristian and Mark's work area. And I love this show just because it gives me so much material for this show. I'm able to pinpoint certain details and just run with them. For example, Kristian referenced RLM when he defended their office setup and all the toys they've got lying around. I was also surprised by the fact that they don't have any Star Wars movie posters in their office. And even though I've seen it before, if somebody asked me to guess which movie poster surrounds Kristian's computer, I never in a million years would have guessed This Is the End. Not in a million years. Kristian also worked in a head of development reference when he was playing with his Star Wars toys, because you wouldn't think that a head of development would do such a thing. And this is relevant because John finally announced this week that Kristian is officially the new head of development. Previously, he had the title of director of development. I've often joked that every 6 months they get bored and they just like to change up their titles to something more fancy. But I guess the ink dried on the contract. Kristian is officially the head of development. But this was recorded before John's tweet. I mean, several days before.
I think we all kind of figured that Kristian was the head of development anyway. So it kind of doesn't change my feelings. And if John wants to put out an official tweet saying that Kristian is the head of development, sure, tell me something I don't know.
Yeah, typically in these situations, corporate has to sign off on it in some regards. So that stuff usually takes time when you're dealing with situations like this. But what's interesting to me, though, is that Kristian left the Schmoes Know live show about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. I think this head of development promotion is part of the reason why. Of course, he's going to see his daughter more at night, but I think Collider saw that he put up 500,000 views in a week's time with Spectacular, and they said, we've got to give him more responsibility. We got to get him here full time. Perhaps he wasn't quite full time already, but I think this is absolutely related to the success of Spectacular. And I think Kristian realizes that he's really got to focus on the Schmoedown in 2017 to see how far he can take this thing. Ellis, Cobster, and company are doing a phenomenal job holding down the fort in his absence. And if you think about all the shows that Ellis missed for stand-up over the years, Kristian is basically redeeming all of those shows that he hosted without him. So by the time this year ends, I'd say they're pretty close to being even when you consider that Kristian led so many shows without Ellis. And by being the head of development, it's not just Schmoedown related. I'm sure he's developing other shows, and I just hope that he continues to bring something new to the table like he did with the Schmoedown, because that is successful because there's nothing quite like it. So hopefully they continue that same mindset instead of creating their own version of existing shows.
No, I mean, you could even go back when they were at the Popcorn Talk Network and Kristian was the producer on Profiles of Malone and Mance and Between the Sheets before it became the Josh McCouga Show.
Box Office Breakdown.
Exactly, Box Office Breakdown. He's always been developing shows. So now that he's at Collider, has a bigger team around him with a bigger production, it makes sense that he can take time away to develop more shows, and only going to get better from here.
Were you amused by the Ellis cocaine bit, or do you think they gilded the lily on that?
I was more amused by Ellis sitting on the bar stool and saying that I'm used to sitting on bar stools. I really thought that was hilarious. The cocaine bit, it wasn't for me, no.
Yeah, I didn't care for it either. But I still love the show. I love the peek behind the curtain. I'm still begging them to do coworker pet peeves where they go around the office and ask each person whose pet peeve bothers them the most. That might create some hurt feelings, though, which is exactly why I'm recommending it. So I'm very curious if they'll take me up on that. But the fans want it. They've been upvoting the crap out of that comment the last couple of weeks. Not that I pay attention to whether my comments are upvoted or not, but...
No, why would you?
Well, let's move to TV Talk. Now, Aaron, where do you stand on TV Talk? Are you a big TV fan? Do you watch the show with regularity? It was Snelling and I's favorite Collider show for a long time. Is this something that you have common ground with us on?
I do have common ground with you on this. I am a big TV Talk fan. You know, like you guys said last week, I believe it is in a state of flux right now with, unfortunately, Sasha leaving the show.
Hey, you listen to this show. I don't know if I realized that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I, too, feel the loss of Sasha, though I feel like Roxy Stryer and Emma Fyfe have filled in nicely. I do like the dynamic. I said a long time ago in a YouTube comment on the show that it just sounds like talking with old friends. Like when you go to a friend's house and you watch like Game of Thrones or something, you're all watching it together, and then you have that discussion afterwards about what you liked and what you didn't like. That's what TV Talk is to me, and that's why I enjoy it so much.
Everybody knows I love the SPR experience. However, I understand and accept that she's no longer with the show for a variety of reasons that I won't get into. However, I am begging the powers that be to please give us Roxy full time. If there's anyone that can fill the SPR experience's mighty big shoes, it's Roxy Stryer. She has a similar ability to be bold, only she knows how far she can and can't go. She knows when to pull back. So Fernandez, Campia, Harloff, just let me have the Roxy Stryer experience. I don't ask for much.
Let me make one more point about TV Talk, almost a critique, if you will. Now, they do a lot of pilot reviews. They do pretty much every popular pilot, whether it be this week they did Santa Clarita Diet. They've done everything else in the past. I didn't have anything to fill in there. My bad. I just wish that at some point, and it could be a quick thing, because Josh watches so many shows, like he and I talked about Shut Eye and all that kind of stuff. I wish they would come back at some point once they finish the show.
Yeah, great point.
And tell us what they thought, because they were discussing Santa Clarita Diet, and it was like they seemed to, for the most part, except for David, seem to enjoy the show. But I would like to see what they felt at the end, because a lot of people have said they liked the show at the beginning, and then at the end it kind of tailors off. So I don't know how they could work that in. I don't know if that's something they're looking into, but I just kind of would like that as to kind of a way to bring it full circle.
You brought up a great point. It would be really nice to have a follow-up segment where we learn what they thought of the season as a whole. So in the case of Taboo or something like that, I want to know their final impression, and that way we can compare it to what they thought initially from the pilot. I also want to give credit to Josh as he's really pulled back on the theorizing. This is something I've talked about a lot. I've compared theories to frozen spoilers that defrost with every episode of a TV season. Were theories something that you had a problem with on TV Talk, Aaron?
I didn't initially, but it really depends on the show for me. Like Game of Thrones, I kind of like to hear the theories because there's people that have read the books, and it's kind of a different feel of fan base where HBO tends to keep their stuff a little bit closer to the vest. But I see what you're saying there with Westworld. It got out of hand. It was like, it's an alternate reality. It's this, it's that. It got so out of hand that I kind of, not too much, but it kind of hindered my enjoyment of the show itself, to where I thought something was going to happen because, they made a really good argument, and then it didn't end up happening, and we went a different direction, and I'm just like, well, what was the point of that then? So that's kind of my feelings on it.
A lot of shows were ruined for me,
for you,
for a lot of people, because writers and podcasters and fans are so invested in Reddit culture these days, and that includes paparazzi set photos as well as leaks from set. So I think we're at the point where theories need to be treated like spoilers and be sectioned off with alerts, because every theory is potentially based on a piece of spoiler information that someone is not supposed to have. So credit to Josh for putting a lid on the theorizing, and of course I'm going to take credit for this because we talked about this in my interview with him. Oh, and Josh and David did a fantastic interview with Mark Guggenheim of Troll Hunters and Arrow fame, so check that out if you haven't already. Lastly, I owe Josh McCouga a correction, as I said last week or the week before that he missed TV Talk to film an Awesome-tacular sketch where he was only used as a background voice. However, it was actually for February 9th's episode where Josh played Zack Snyder in an interrogation scene. You cannot make this stuff up. Whomever lit that scene is clearly taking cues from Better Call Saul, as well as a bit of Breaking Bad. Jeremy played a kind of Saul Goodman type agent, but I'm really enjoying Awesome-tacular. The sketches are great, the meltdown trips are great, so make sure to check that out at go90.com. Shifting to heroes, I don't have much to say on this episode, but Comic Book Girl 19 was a guest, along with Amy Dallin, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Schnepp Zone was in full effect as well, but I really like the vibe that Comic Book Girl 19 brings to the show. She even gave us an anecdote about how one of her friends is the person who helps Ben Affleck get out of the Batman costume, and how it would be impossible for him to direct the Batman. So Aaron, since I don't know a lot of your Schmoedown tastes yet, where do you stand on heroes?
I'm a big fan of Good Lord. I'm a big fan of Comic Book Girl 19. I follow her channel. I followed it actually for a long time, even before I started watching Heroes. She gives unapologetic reviews. She's a big comic book fan. She has a lot of knowledge, and she will tell you exactly what she thinks. So it's good to see her pop up every once in a while. I didn't even know that she was on Heroes, and then I caught her, I think the past couple times she's been on, I saw her. So it was good to see her. I like Heroes because they don't just talk about the same things they talk about on Movie Talk. They do take those same topics, but they do it in a way where you get a deeper knowledge, where Schnepp and Burnett and Amy, Ashley V, or Comic Book Girl, or Jason Inman, they kind of bring the comic element to it and kind of give you more of a rounded backstory. It definitely is the nerdiest show on Collider, I'll give you that.
They don't call them sweaties for nothing.
And this week especially, they had an amazing discussion on what the future of comic books should be going forward, especially with all the DC rebirth. If you're following comics, DC had the giant rebirth, so everything's back to number one, and how Marvel does their number ones every year or so, and it's a giant mess, and you can't really get people started. So it was a really cool discussion that probably helped a lot of people out there that are afraid to get into comics and don't know where to begin. So I really enjoyed this week's discussion.
Do you read comic books?
See, here's the thing. I didn't for the longest time. When I was a kid, I read The Uncanny X-Men, and then when I got into, middle school and high school, I quit reading. But then about '05, when Batman Begins came out, I started reading Batman graphic novels again. Then I picked up Watchmen, because I'd never read it, but I heard it was fantastic. And Watchmen is my favorite graphic novel that's ever been made. It's fantastic. I try to read it once a year. I love it to death. And then I started picking up comics again, and then I kind of fell off. And then once DC Rebirth happened, I jumped back on, because it was, hey, I can start at number 1 and be caught up with the story. I do keep up with some DC Rebirth books. I keep up with Batman. I keep up with The Flash. I keep up with Wonder Woman, because they're all very well done and by very great artists. But that's about the extent. I do read some DC. I still read The Walking Dead. I don't watch the show, but I do like the book.
Oddly enough, the only graphic novel that I own is Watchmen, as I enjoyed the movie at the time, although I haven't seen it more than once, and I have not seen the director's cut. But God bless you, Malin Ackerman and Patrick Wilson. And I just realized that I made The Times They Are a Changin' reference earlier in this episode, and that's a big song in that movie. It's also a recurring theme of this podcast.
Let me go ahead and tell you that you do need to open it. Go ahead and read through it when you get a chance, and then watch the movie again. Watch the director's cut. It is one of the few comic book films that actually does a really good job and is faithful to the source material. And even though Alan Moore hated it, it's still a very good movie, and even better once you've read the graphic novel and understand it.
I would love to talk about this some more, but I currently feel some tightness around my neck as Darth Minor Harloff is force choking me for getting off topic. But let me just say this. If I didn't read in 2007 or whatever this was, I certainly don't read in 2017. But I appreciate the encouragement, Aaron.
Well, yeah, you got to put down the book and pick up the remote, as they say.
What a perfect reference, and what a way to bring us back on point. Moving to Nightmares, obviously, as you guys have heard by now, the show is on the bubble. I did an interview with Clark Wolf where she was very candid about what's taking place, so check that out if you haven't already. But this was the first show that went live. The big topics of conversation this week dealt with Friday the 13th and the remake being canceled because Rings was such a disaster at the box office. So Aaron, is Nightmares in your wheelhouse?
I am a gigantic horror fan, so when they announced Nightmares, I was super into it. I love Clark. I love her takes. The best thing about Clark is that I rarely agree with her when she gives her critiques, and that's perfectly fine because it's a completely different take. It bums me out that Collider Nightmares is on the bubble because it brings something different than your typical fare. Yeah, Movie Talk will probably talk about the more popular franchises, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Street. If it wasn't for Nightmares, I wouldn't have seen a film like Train to Busan or The Girl with All the Gifts that John Schnepp kept touting on the show. And I would have missed out on two films that I really enjoyed from last year. They were fantastic. I just like the different discussions. I'm a horror nerd, so I love geeking out with them over stuff. And I think it's one of the better shows on the channel, no doubt about it. And it does pain me that they are in a state of flux in the bubble there. I hate it.
Look at what we saw on Wednesday's Movie Talk. World War Z, potentially with Dave Fincher, was supposed to be the lead story, but it got bumped in favor of the Star Wars parody story. So Movie Talk prioritizes superheroes, it prioritizes lightsabers, and this is why Nightmares is so valuable, because it's able to give priority to genre, not just horror, but genre overall, genre filmmaking. Movie Talk spent 9 minutes discussing that breaking story regarding the Star Wars parody. Their former lead story that day, World War Z, got only 5 minutes, and Star Wars ended up getting the thumbnail that day. World War Z was supposed to get it. So, perfect example of why we need Nightmares right there. And since the announcement, their numbers have gone up. The last two episodes, respectively, and to this point, are averaging around 38,000. So, as I said in the interview, it would be a shame for this show to not get the chance to cover those big genre tentpoles, like your Kong, like your Alien, like your Mummy. There's such big genre stuff coming that they've been working up to all this time, and it'd be a shame to cut them short of being able to receive the added traffic, the added views that those films bring. Any other thoughts on Nightmares?
I did have one thought. You know, you've said it before, and you and Sally have talked about this. Schnepp tends to spoil some things. And this week, I'm not going to talk about it, and we're not going to give spoilers here, but there was a topic on Nightmares this week that was a bit of a spoiler if you haven't seen a certain film. You know, bless Schnepp, but right before they even got to the spoiler alert, he gave it away. And I felt super bummed for those people that hadn't seen the film. Luckily, I had seen the film the night before, or I would have been super upset. So I know Schnepp gets excited. He's very excitable, as given by the discussion of Friday the 13th they've had for the past couple weeks. But man, they really got to watch those spoilers.
To be fair, I always say to be fair with a bit of sarcasm, because whenever someone says to be fair, they're typically not being fair. To be fair, the film has been out for quite a while, the film that they spoiled. However, before they started discussing it, Clark said we're about to spoil all things related to that specific director. So based on the mentioning of that director, some people should have said, okay, I haven't seen this director's current film, I better get out of here quick. I feel like there was some warning, but yes, I totally empathize with those people who were not expecting to be spoiled in a certain regard, and it's just a shame. But again, there's been a lot of time to go see this movie at this point. There was a slight window to turn the sound off, but after 3 or 4 weeks, when a film is #1 at the box office, and you've probably heard that something happens in that film, you gotta be awfully careful, especially when watching shows that talk about films up to the minute. Yes, guys like Schneepuga should be more careful, but at this stage, it's ultimately on you. So if Dennis Zen gets spoiled after 4 weeks, that's on him, because he works in an office where people are paid to talk about films, and if he's not current on the #1 film in the country the last 3 weeks, that's on him, not them.
It's kind of the risk you take when you watch these type of shows, right, and you're invested in all this news. It's a risk. I saw a lot of people that they weren't really complaining, more or less. They had already seen the film, but they kind of suggested that maybe the title of that certain topic should have read, instead of what it did, right, it should have read the film and spoilers, like in parentheses, which I think would have been a lot better, because if you just look at the topic, you really wouldn't know what they were even talking about.
That is why Clark said the name of the director, because I think she recognized that too. But yeah, some people still did not make the connection.
That's a bummer for them, but like I said, luckily for me, I got to see the film the day before, and I really enjoyed it.
Would this even be an issue with Jedi Council? Because I think people inherently know that if they haven't seen Rogue One, they know not to tune in to Jedi Council. So in the case of Nightmares or Heroes or Movie Talk, you can't expect the world to slow down for you if you haven't seen the #1 film of the last 3 or 4 weeks. So either tread lightly or simply avoid shows that discuss movies in detail. Now, Mailbag. I'm one of those guys who does not mind John Campea doing his own mailbags. I loved it at AMC because it gave us a peek behind the curtain while John would tell stories from his life. However, a lot of new fans are more accustomed to the panels that they did in recent memory with Sinead and Rocha and Riley and whomever. I refer to the latter as Fancy Mailbag because they shot it on the Movie Talk set and it took a lot of resources. So I was thrilled when they went back to the bare bones Mailbag, but a lot of people were upset, and now we're seeing Campea kind of compromise as he's brought on Ellis last weekend as well as Perry this weekend. So John is listening to you guys, and this is his compromise since Fancy Mailbag is no longer an option. Aaron, is Mailbag something that you watch consistently?
I am not a regular watcher of Mailbag. The reason being is I feel like most of the questions tend to be the same things that we've heard over and over and over. Do you think Jared Leto will be in the Batman standalone? This or that? I just kind of got annoyed with it for the longest time. But on the other hand, I did watch a couple of when they had a panel, when it was like Sinead and Riley and Rocha. I did like that element of it because it gave us 2 different perspectives instead of just John. But it's still doing nothing for me. I understand why it went back to just John and a guest sometimes, due to production costs and things like that. Schedule frees up more people on the schedule. And also, like, if you have to get Mailbag done, you can just pop it in a laptop camera and a microphone and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about getting to a set. John could do it from his car, essentially, if he wanted to. So while Mailbag is not for me, I still understand why it's there, and I understand why people like it.
I wonder if this is going to stick where he's able to have a guest on, just because he tried to do this when he used to do it, but he couldn't get people to commit, especially on the quote-unquote weekend. So I hope he can keep it going like this, but I don't mind if he just does it himself. John is not appearing on Heroes and Jedi Council all that often anymore. He kind of picks his spots. So I like John being by himself and just talking to us without any shtick, without being in performance mode. I like when he's just being John. So guest or no guest, I'm happy either way, but I understand some people are not. And remember, no one wants to take away or change your favorite show, but sometimes there is no choice in the matter. And so the fact that he is still continuing to produce Mailbag at all shows you that he does care about the fact that you like the show and you'd rather have something versus nothing. Now, Aaron, it's going to be a little bizarre for you in this next segment because I'm reacting to something called the Movie Trivia Schmoedown. Is this something you're familiar with?
I am a little bit familiar with it. I have seen it from time to time.
Well, it's a pretty good trivia show. It deals with movie trivia, and it's very similar as far as the kayfabe, as far as the drama around these movie trivia matches. It's very similar to WWE, ECW, WCW. It's also very similar to UFC. So are these things that you're interested in too?
I dabble. I think, is Hulk Hogan still wrestling? I think I'm still into Hulk Hogan if he's still around.
I know of a Terry Bollea as well as a Hollywood Hogan. Is this the same person?
Yeah, Terry Bollea from Muscle Beach, of course.
So from now on, this segment will consist of me reacting to these movie trivia schmoedowns while you simply react to my reactions. We'll eventually explain why we're doing it this way, in case people think I'm trying to hog the mic even more than I have already. But our first match was a team match. See, there's teams in the Schmoedown, Aaron, where two people get together to form a tag team, if you will, and they square off against another tag team, if you will.
What a concept. That sounds really nice.
So imagine Legion of Doom is squaring off against the Rockers, my two favorite tag team duos of all time. It's very similar to that.
I would prefer the British Bulldogs versus the Hart Foundation, but I see where you're headed.
I should have known that Jim the Anvil Neidhart made an impression on you as a young man with those pink tights. So we had the Wolves of Steel versus 6 Degrees. Wolves of Steel, of course, is Clark Wolf and Mark Riley, squaring off against Stacey Howard and Brienne Miss Movies Chandler. I have been encouraging her to go with the name Brienne the Chop Shop Chandler because she disassembles her opponents.
It's not bad.
Other options include Brutal Brienne Chandler, as well as Brienne the Bruiser Chandler. But if she goes with the Chop Shop, you'll know it came from me. Anyways, it was a very close match, closer than I thought it would be. The Wolves ended up winning 28-25. They won on their three-pointer for Whoopi Goldberg. A lot of people have speculated, have theorized, that the Wolves of Steel would be breaking up soon. And when 6 Degrees took the lead in round 3, I started to think, is this happening right now? Because Clark jumped ahead of Riley to play JTE, last week I theorized that this was setting up the Wolves of Steel breakup because if Clark beats JTE, she has to play Riley, and regardless of who wins that match, I think that's going to be the reason for their tag team breakup. So I still believe that's going to happen. It just became a question of, will they be squaring off as tag team partners or will they be squaring off as former tag team partners? So when 6 Degrees was threatening them in the final round, I thought, well, maybe they are expediting the breakup. But that wasn't the case as the Wolves pulled it off. But what I found most interesting was Clark's reaction in the post-interview. She was not acting like her normal self. She was looking down. She wasn't smiling. Yeah, you could say she was mad at her performance. However, I think she was planting the seed for the future breakup between Riley and herself. I feel like they could cut that footage together to sell the case that, yeah, this was brewing for a while. Just like they cut together footage of Finstock and Makuga having these little squabbles on various shows the last several months. They even went back to 2013. So what do you think about all this, Aaron? Do you have an opinion on my reaction?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the names Clark and Mark together is adorable. I really enjoy that. Second of all, it's well documented that I've wanted a Mark Riley turn since Mark Riley lost the championship to Dan Murrell. I have a 2-page diatribe of how they can start that feud, and I've been told many times, more than I care to count, by Chris Loff, that that's not ever going to happen. And now I'm kind of to the point where I think it might be a misdirect, where he keeps saying, no, Mark Riley's not going to turn. He'll never turn. But then Clark turns, and I don't see it coming. I think that maybe I don't give the commissioner enough credit, and that he's definitely got a misdirect going in front of my face right now.
Yeah, Chairman Harloff is always looking several moves ahead, but I talked to Clark about this, and she said because JTE is hot right now, she thinks it would be a big win for her to get her confidence back after some tough losses singles-wise against Makuga as well as Dan Murrell. However, it doesn't make a lot of sense why Riley, who wants that belt back, would give up a quicker path to getting that belt back, especially when he now has to go through his own tag team partner, potentially. He could have avoided that drama altogether. I still believe that the Wolves of Steel are on a collision course in regards to singles play, and that's going to set up their breakup. So look for a Schmoedown City Siren type stable forming, perhaps with Stacy, Clark, Brienne, and perhaps some of the new women that are joining the league this year. The Wolves have won 2 straight, right?
Absolutely. They are right on the cusp of a championship shot, I would say. Very close.
See, that's why this is awfully strange, because Riley could have played JTE, potentially beat him, and then moved on to the next opponent. He could have avoided his tag team partner altogether, and that's just bizarre, because the tag team is doing well, so why risk it with a collision course in singles play when they could have avoided that? And last but not least, the Wolves of Steel accepted Team ETC's challenge during their post-interview, and I cannot wait for Clark to open up a can of whoop-ass on Ricky Schroeder. Now, moving to singles play. See, in singles play, Aaron, it's only one person who squares off against another person.
Oh, so it's like mano y mano. Okay, I get it.
Are you familiar with these sort of matches as a fan of the WCE?
I think it's WCCW, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, regardless, this singles match is not just any singles match. It's a title match for the Intercontinental Championship. Oh. Aaron, do you know what the Intercontinental Championship is?
I'm assuming that it's a title belt that goes through the movie John Wick, and they just pass it to different assassins?
Exactly.
Ah, fantastic. I knew it.
It means you're the most hardcore of all the singles champions.
Okay.
That's why the Intercontinental Champion is sometimes known as the Hardcore Champion as well.
Oh, makes sense.
Now, this match was originally supposed to be Mark Andreyko versus Robert Meyer Burnett for the Intercontinental Championship, but since Finn Draco was needed last week, the fans would have gone crazy if Andreyko was able to play this week for the belt. So it just made sense to replace Andreyko with Hector Navarro, since Navarro and Burnett had such a great showdown at that, was it the Spectacular SmackDown or the SmackDown Spectacular?
SmackDown. Is that something that Chris Jericho came up with? I feel like Chris Jericho came up with that name.
I think it was Val Venus. I think he was the one who coined SmackDown.
Val Venus. Okay, cool. Former partner of Prince Albert. Got it.
But in a strange turn of events, Jason Robinman came out to challenge these guys to one of those fatal 3-ways? Is that what they're called?
I think they call it a do-si-do. I think actually is what that's called.
That's right, do-si-do. However, Robert Meyer Burnett said no.
Why would he do that?
That's a very good question. I mean, Robert Meyer Burnett is notoriously camera shy despite working on camera. So who knows? Maybe he left a hot toy on the stove.
Oh, okay.
However, Robert Meyer Burnett did say to Jason Robinman that he'd see him in a tag team championship match. So the question is, did Robert Meyer Burnett spoil the outcome of Patriots versus Trek? Or Is he that confident that Trek is going to beat the Patriots that he thinks it'll set up a Heroes and Trek Tag Team Championship match at some point?
Wow. Amazing.
Robert told Jason he would see him as a tag team champ soon. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Aaron. But man, what another classic showdown between these two. They've had two duels that are as hardcore as any match we've seen. This time, Star Trek and Superman couldn't save Robert Meyer Burnett from himself as Hector, the Nightmare Navarro, took the belt as I predicted he would at Schmoedown Spectacular. The final score was 20-18 Navarro, as Burnett could not answer the year in which Superman 3 was released, 1983, the year I was born. He said 1984. Besides Navarro taking away the belt, there were some major takeaways in this match, including the fact that if you're Hector Navarro, it's going to be awfully uncomfortable to walk into the next DC All Access taping. Whether it was missing Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman or passing on DC once he spun it on the wheel, it was a bad showing for Navarro and DC, and Jason Robinman had a great time poking fun at him since Robinman also works for DC All Access. Hopefully DC All Access's CFO, Tiffany Smith, has mercy for Navarro.
If Warner Brothers keeps an eye on employees as much as they do their film properties, I think Hector's all right.
You are not wrong, Aaron. You are certainly not wrong. So in the speed round, the same old issue popped up that drives me crazy. I hate the fact that RMB buzzed in and did not have an answer. Yes, he lost a point, I realize that, but it took away the opportunity for Hector Navarro to answer and gain a point. I feel like in those situations where someone buzzes in without an answer, wasting everybody's time, I feel like the person who did not get to answer should have the added opportunity to steal. I want a 2-point swing in those cases because I only want people buzzing in with what they believe to be the right answer. I want the first person with an answer to buzz in, not the first person to buzz in. So if you buzz in first and you don't have an answer, you must suffer the consequences, including a lost point as well as a potential steal to your opponent. Of course, the opponent has to answer the question instantly. Perhaps you give them a new question. I'm not sure, but some people will argue, people will just throw out any answer to avoid the steal. Well, there's not enough time to really think of alternative plans because our natural instinct is to try to get it right. So I think this is the right way to go, as it prioritizes the answer and not the buzz. But here's another strange moment. Did you notice, Aaron, that Robert started the round with a different colored buzzer than what he ended with?
I did not. I guess we could call this Buzzergate.
At first, I thought he was using the same buzzer that Campea smashed and threw on Movie Talk recently, but it did not turn out to be that one. Maybe he thought the color brought him bad luck?
The theories are out there.
Aaron, I should have asked you already, but what do you think about my proposed steal in speed rounds when someone just buzzes in without an answer? Very few people agree with me on this. They think that the deducted point is enough.
I personally don't like buzzers because I don't like to have my hand shocked. It's not my thing. But sure, I think that's actually a good point. If they miss the question and buzz in, or don't answer, I should say, then yeah, I think the other person should get an opportunity, but they should also still have to answer it within the same 3-second window or whatever they have. As long as it's fair like that, it's fine.
Two reasonable voices on the same podcast. Who would have thought? Aaron, what was your immediate reaction to the match?
My immediate reaction was, oh my god, that belt is gigantic. That was number one, and Hector is either incredibly small or that belt must be the size of a house. That was my immediate reaction.
As the listeners know, Snelljob and I were rather obsessed with the true size of these people since we're used to seeing them behind a desk. So anything that gives us perspective, be it John Schnepp or be it a championship belt, we appreciate. Now, as far as the post interviews go, I teased atop the show that I had a compliment to pay Emma Fyffe. The listeners know that I'm not the biggest Fife fan. For some reason, I just haven't connected with her. I don't think she is in her element when she's on the Schmoes Know Show. I don't think she's the right fit for TV talk either. However, when it concerns the Schmoedown post interviews, I think Emma is currently their best option. I still think the SPR experience was the best at these post interviews, but Emma has really come into her own as she asks the right questions, and I'm sure they're coached a little bit on what to say, but most importantly, she nails the tone that is needed for these backstage or behind the scenes interviews because they are so laced with kayfabe that you have to be able to sell those moments, and she does a great job of doing it. So this is Emma's role, I think. So to wrap up the post-interview drama, Jason Robinman challenged Navarro. He challenged Burnett to a fatal three-way do-si-do, which I believe everybody accepted, to be determined, I guess. But more importantly, Cobster, Kristian Ruvalcaba, came out and asked Navarro to join the Young Bucks, and Navarro accepted.
Unbelievable.
Did this shock you that he joined the Young Bucks?
Well, what shocks me more is that Cobster doesn't answer my DMs, but I digress on that.
At least you have the ability to DM Kristian Ruvalcaba.
It didn't surprise me that much because Hector, in the inner geekdom space, Hector's great. Outside of that, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Could he be the world champion? Could he be the galactic champion? Who knows? Maybe Cobster is that guy to take him to that next level. We shall see.
Going back to Cobster for a second, he and I have had a rocky and tumultuous relationship thus far, but there was some progress this week. We even exchanged gifts. So now that you're the co-host on the #1 show on the SK Podcast channel, I would say that his treatment towards you is bound to improve.
Which is very interesting because I'm here to announce that I'm also now the host of the Wenger Show. So it probably makes a lot of sense now.
Aaron, there's a reason why I've been sharing my reactions to the Schmoedown while you've been reacting to my reactions to the Schmoedown. But when it comes to explaining the reason why, well, I'm not going to do it because I'm not great at it. But we have you, the director of Schmoedown Rundown Operations. What the hell do you do on the Schmoedown Rundown?
Well, we have a lot of fun. We talk about rankings. We talk about news. We talk about predictions. We actually have a prediction segment. We talk about Schmoedowns in the near future. We talk about Schmoedowns in the far future. We talk about pictures. We talk about photos. We talk about things about Kristian's Twitter account. We have a rotating cast of panelists of myself, Frank Janisch, Paul Wolf, and anybody else we can bring around. We tend to have it every Saturday around 5:40 p.m. No, wait. 7:25 PST Pacific Standard Time, and join us there.
Now, you said the near future and the far future, but what about the present future?
I don't know what that is. I live in the future. I don't even live in the now, sir.
Clearly, you have no respect for Miles Teller's filmography, but it's now time for everyone's favorite segment, the mispronunciation of the week. Aaron, you're a big fan of the #1 show on the SK Podcast channel. Do you love this segment like everybody else?
Yeah, that's where you discuss the correct pronunciation of people who've got it wrong with Gal Gadot when it's actually Gal Gadot. I got it, yeah.
Clearly, you have yet to recover from your Schmoedown Rundown live read. However, as soon as I call you a fellow voice of reason, you go and do this to me. So I'll never forgive you.
And that's Alicia Vikander as well?
First off, it's Alicia Vikander. Alicia, not Alicia. Alicia Vikander. And it's Gal Gadot. Gal Gadot. But here are this week's mispronunciations of the week. I've got several of them. A lot of mistakes this week, people. A lot of mistakes. I really think you need to listen to the show and just let me do the heavy lifting for you. Once again, it's Chad Stahelski, director of John Wick 2, as well as John Wick 1, along with David Leitch. Mark Ellis referred to the director of John Wick Chad Stahelski as Chad Sobieski, like he's the father of Lily Sobieski. No, Chad Stahelski. Number 2, Joe Manganiello. Natasha called him Joe Michelangelo. It's Joe Manganiello. Manganiello, friend of Josh McCouga. And a similar name as Manganiello, the director of the upcoming Logan, James Mangold. M-A-N-G. It's not Mangold. It's not Manganiello. It's Manganiello and Mangold. James Mangold.
I just call him Jim, but yeah, I got it.
Jim Mangold. That works too. So those are your mispronunciations of the week. Before we get to the entree portion of this show, the orange chicken, if you will, that's the Schmoes Know live show, I want to say a quick thing about Jedi Council since we accidentally skipped over it. Darth Minor Harloff, along with Mark Ellis and Tiffany Smith, discussed Josh Gad and Daisy Ridley's recent videos where Josh is basically groveling with Daisy for information about Star Wars The Last Jedi. Tiffany made a point about how this was probably cleared by a ton of people over at Disney, and I want to go the other way on that because I think that this was all Disney's idea. When you have stars from your 2 biggest films of 2017 doing something together like this is orchestrated. This is strategic. Yeah, they're making another movie together, Murder on the Orient Express, but I think this was a very specific plan by Disney's marketing team as it came out really at the perfect time as Beauty and the Beast was kicking its marketing campaign into full gear. So Mark Ellis has to be thrilled that the last person to make $200 million plus in an opening weekend, Daisy Ridley, is indirectly helping Disney market Beauty and the Beast along with one of its stars, Josh Gad. Before we get to our live show discussion, I want to quickly remind everyone how you can support this very show. Please rate and review the Schmoes Know podcast feed in iTunes, even if you don't use iTunes. If you're listening to this episode on an Apple device, make sure to, again, leave a rating/review through the podcast app. If you tend to listen to the show in YouTube, head over to iTunes anyway, click play, and leave a rating/review. That helps every show on this feed, whether it's the #1 rated Schmoeville after show or the unrated Don't Be a Beardo with Brian Perez. Also, make sure to follow my new co-host Aaron Turner at AT Titanium, as well as me, Brian Davids, at BDF331. More of my work can be found at filmschlubspodcast.com. Well, like I said, Aaron, it's time for the entree portion of this show. The Kung Pao chicken, the sweet and sour pork, the beef and broccoli, the chow mein, if you will. Of course, I'm talking about Schmoes Know Show number 269, John Wick 2/Lego Batman preview. Our cast this week included Mark Ellis, Joelle Monique, Ken Knapsack, Brett Sheridan, and on the couch by himself, kicking it old school, was Mark Riley. So Aaron, to kick off every discussion, I want to ask you your overall impression of this episode before we get into the details. So we're big fans, that's why we do this show, but how would you rate number 269?
I know a lot of people were high on it. A lot of people were really excited that the phone calls were back and the guests that were on and the newlywed style game that was played. But honestly, I didn't love it. I think it was one of the few episodes so far this year that I haven't been a fan of. Just gotta say.
Well, despite being your debut on this show, your honesty is appreciated. I mean, just because we're fans and we do an after show, that doesn't mean we have to lie about our feelings for something. But compared to the last 2 episodes, I wasn't as high as those, but I certainly enjoyed the heck out of this episode, as there were moments that will be referenced until the end of time, really. If I put on the green eye shade for a minute, you could say that this episode was busy. They had a bunch of guests, including 2 couples, Jason and Ashley Robinman, as well as Ed Greer and Clee Wiggins, their fellow comedian friends of Ellis. So I love that he's bringing people from that side of his life that we typically don't get to meet all that often. But now that Ellis is running the show full time, we're able to meet more people from his life, and that's always a great thing. By the end of 2017, the entire roster of comedians at the Comedy Store will have been on the Schmoes Know Show. But let's not bury the lead any longer. The star of this episode was the return of the phone call feature. Andres and Covina, Justin in Chicago, they produced some memorable calls, and throughout the show's history, anytime a caller is thrown into the mix, and the same can be said of guests, but anytime those unknown variables are added to the show, the energy and the dynamic created by those callers, by those guests, rubs off on the rest of the show, including the cast. Aaron, have you been to Cobster's new apartment?
No, I'm actually not on the waiting list. Actually, I tried to buzz in to talk to Cobster, and he said that not only did he not know me, that he wanted me removed from the premises.
You must have used the green buzzer that Robert Meyer Burnett did not want to use during the speed round. Or you again tried to sing Wonderwall a cappella over the loudspeaker at his apartment complex, and he's just not down for that outside of the office. And will you be recording the Schmoedown Rundown in his second bedroom?
Yeah, and the Wenger show, absolutely, as well. We're going to do that. I even actually tried to come in with RB3. RB3, a good friend of mine, and he still wouldn't let me in. So I don't know what's up there. We're going to have to talk.
RB3, can you confirm or deny this? I was very amused by the fact that Brett said that he had a roommate despite his family living with this roommate. It's like you, me, and Dupree. Like Brett had his own Dupree living in his house.
Sounds like a reality show. I would have loved to have seen some cameras inside the Sheridan household while that was going on. That would have been really entertaining.
You could call it Sharing Sheridan. Or, since the Schmoes released Brett's Home Alone sketch that he did recently, his second sketch could be a take on you, me, and Dupree. Would Mark Ellis play Dupree, or is Brett not good enough friends with Mark Ellis to hand him that role?
You could really just get Mark Riley to put back on that wig that he wore in the Schmoedown, and he could be Dupree, if you will.
And I'm pretty sure that Riley would pass Brett's best friend test since Riley, Brett, and Kristian worked at CPK back in the day. Plus, Riley could write himself his own lines since he's a writer.
There you go. It writes itself.
So one of the many goals of both Kristian and now Cobster since Phase 6 started was to really bring back the vibe that existed at Toad Hop in Phase 3. Specifically, being in a small room where everyone's looking directly at each other, and even though they're in a relatively big-sized studio, they're able to create a more intimate environment thanks to the partition and the couch. So we have that vibe once again, mixed with the Phase 5 couch vibe as well. And this episode, of course, marks the return of phone calls. So Andres and Covina was the first caller to call in, and I thought he was about to insult Ken because he was saying something to the effect of, a lot of people don't look up to you, and I thought he was going to sort of double down on that, and I could tell Ken was kind of on edge, but Andres and Covina ended up saying something rather lovely to Ken. So that was our first phone call in a while. It was rather difficult to get that call on the air. They had to call him back. A bunch of people were calling in when they weren't taking calls, so it's a work in progress. So Aaron, since one phone call can change the entire dynamic of an episode and give them material to run with for the remainder of that episode, are you glad that we're back in the phone call business?
I'm definitely happy to see phone calls. I thought it was even funnier that not only were people so excited to call that it overloaded the system, whatever they were using, that they actually had to call Andres and Covina back. I thought that was hilarious. And the first time that they called somebody who didn't answer, it went straight to voicemail. You can't write these moments. It's just icing on the cake. I loved every second of it.
You can tell Cobster is kind of hard on himself when things don't go as planned, but that chaos is what makes an episode like this. So sometimes you got to embrace the unexpected. Speaking of unexpected, there was a sound drop that played during this episode that immortalized yours truly into Schmoes Know lore forever. So I tried to call in when everybody else was calling in, as I wanted to drop a live "You're welcome" for the ratings. I wanted to get an apology from Brett after he gave me a hard time last week for equating Ellis and him as best friends, even though I was referencing Ellis's own analogy. I had some other goals in mind, but we can save that call for another time, as I was already immortalized once in the episode. I can let guys like Justin and Andres have their moment too.
I think Cobster actually blocked your number, so it's going to be a little bit harder for you to get in, so you may want to use my phone.
Because it's Cobster, I would typically agree with you, but because I bring ratings, I don't think he's willing to cut off his nose to spite his face. You know what I mean, RB3? Oh, by the way, here's some fun trivia. The original name of Jesse Pinkman in the earliest Breaking Bad script was Marion Dupree. So Vince changed the name to Jesse Pinkman because of You, Me, and Dupree, aka Sharon Sheridan. So Aaron, you know who Brett Sheridan is, right? He's got a segment on this show.
I think, is he the brother of the lady, the actress that was on Desperate Housewives? Is that correct?
He's actually the cousin of Nicolette Sheridan. So excellent reference.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
So Brett Sheridan has this segment on the Schmoes Know Show called Brett to the Future. And it's basically meant to catch Brett up on all these films that he missed from being a dad, from being a husband, and being a roommate to Dupree. But then he drops this bombshell on this episode as he casually mentions that he's part of SAG and that he gets screeners. So this piece of information completely contradicts the entire segment of Brett to the Future. This entire time, he's had no excuse for being behind on films because he's had screeners sent to him this entire time. I mean, I'm not surprised that he still has his SAG card. We knew that he did some acting as well as some stand-up, but a lot of us believe that he truly lived in a remote place and couldn't get to the movies easily because he was a family man. But this entire time, he's had screeners for current releases just sitting in his mailbox.
Scandalous.
He had to walk 10 feet to watch Arrival.
I like to think that maybe Dupree takes them from the mailbox without him knowing.
Great point. Dupree, you son of a bitch.
Explains why Riley has seen all these films.
This explains why they had to kick Dupree out recently, because he was screwing with Brett's Brett to the Future segment.
There you go.
He went to go grab that Hunt for the Wilder People screener, and it wasn't there. And by the time he tracked it down in Dupree's room, he was already in a bad mood, and the comedy in that film did nothing for him, hence his review. So this week he reviewed Hell or High Water, and this review was maddening. He was saying the pace was slow. I think that's insane. I was never bored at any point in this film. It was exciting, it was well written, it was well acted, it was well everything. Taylor Sheridan, God bless you. I want to say thank you once again to Kurt Sutter, who refused to pay Taylor Sheridan what he wanted in season 3 of Sons of Anarchy, and as a result, Taylor quit acting and has since become one of our finest screenwriters. So thanks again, Kurt. So I typically enjoy Brett to the Future when Brett agrees with me, but I don't enjoy it when Brett disagrees with me. What about you, Aaron?
I don't like anybody that disagrees with my take on films. I find it disrespectful.
I agree. I've noticed that we're often in agreement, so I don't blame you for having sound reasoning and logic. It's kind of nice to always be in agreement versus always being in disagreement.
Usually I disagree with everybody, but now I found my common ground. So
we are the common ground.
That could be our team name.
I'll run that by Kristian and Mark's agent. Now the news. What was interesting about the news, typically I highlight a certain moment in the news, but on this episode, Ken barely talked this entire episode because I believe he was saving up for the news. I believe he was tired, I believe he was out of it, and I think he was saving his voice for the news. What do you think?
I think Ken knows when to pick his shots. When he sees that there's a lot of people in the studio that's going to be on the show that he may not necessarily be familiar with, I feel like Ken knows, especially when there's other comedians, that Ken doesn't want to overload the jokes. He doesn't want to go too far. So once he gets his spot in the news or something we'll talk about here in a little bit, Ken knows when to pick his shots and goes for the knockout and gets it every single time.
Alicia Vikander. Fantastic point, by the way. I agree once again.
Was she in a movie with Dennis Villeneuve?
Aaron, what did I just say about common ground and being fellow voices of reason? Actually, don't answer that. I'm just going to pretend like it didn't happen. So Ed Greer and Clee Wiggins, they're two of Ellis's stand-up cronies, and like I said earlier, the entire slate at the Irvine Improv is going to be on the Schmoes Know Show by the end of 2017, and I love it. I love getting all these different interesting people on the show. They faced off against Jason and Ashley Robinman. It was a 50 Shades of Batman type game. They used the wheel. Man, that wheel is getting so much use at that studio. It's not just useful for the Schmoedown, but it's useful for whatever else they want to do. I love how much use they're getting out of it, even though it's going away soon. Apparently, they're getting a new wheel from Iowa, and it feels like they said that like 3 weeks ago. Did the Amazon drone drop it off in Ashburn, Virginia or something? Did Shoesy Pants shoot it down from the air? Was it sent to the Campia Ranch by accident?
Could have been lost in the mail. You got to get the signing confirmation when you ship something. It's got to be done. Somebody really dropped the ball there. Maybe it was Cobster. Maybe not.
Did they take the Oregon Trail?
They may have died of dysentery along the way.
I think so. Maybe, just maybe, Dupree jacked the wheel. Aaron, I've lived my life according to a very specific set of rules and codes. One of those rules includes never trusting anyone who doesn't have a favorite restaurant. And while I like her, Ashley Robinman doesn't have a favorite restaurant.
Unbelievable. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I sell the idea that she doesn't have a favorite restaurant. So did you enjoy the 50 Shades of Batman wheel game?
I enjoyed it about as much as it looked like Ellis was enjoying it, which was not much.
I'm sure Ken enjoyed the fact that the wheel blocked him from view. Hopefully they'll figure out a proper position for it for next time. I think the wheel game concept can work overall. Sometimes it doesn't go as you plan, but even when a bit doesn't work, it still gives us some comedic gems here and there. So nothing is ever truly a failure, especially when you know they always improve things for next time.
It definitely didn't fail at causing marital strife, so that's what's most important.
As long as it broke up a couple marriages, then it was a success. So another one of my favorite elements of the past week or so is the video of JTE celebrating the Patriots' win. But what makes it so great is the fact that Campia is also celebrating the Patriots in this video, and yet they never once embrace. They never high five, they never hug, they never do anything to kind of share that common moment together. Maybe they're not close enough to have a moment like this, perhaps because the Patriots are Campia's fourth favorite team. Maybe he doesn't believe in sharing moments like this with other people. Perhaps that's reserved for his third favorite team, like the Seahawks. I don't know, but did you notice this?
I did notice that, and I think it may have something to do with the fact that the Patriots are not John's first favorite team, as he continues to tout the horrendous Toronto Maple Leafs as his number one team.
And that makes sense since Schnepp is a big fan of the Calgary Flames.
Jerome McGinley, great player.
My other favorite moment in this video, JT is going crazy, and then there's Dennis in the foreground, on his phone with his glasses on. He looks completely disinterested by what's going on with this sporting match. He's just texting away like there's nothing going on, like there wasn't the greatest comeback in NFL history. So that was my second favorite moment, besides the fact that there was no celebration among the two Patriot fans. Ellis, great quote. "It's not really a show anymore. It's just a bunch of desperate nerds trying to make phone calls." I really like that quote.
It's great.
Well, they brought up the Tom Dagnino loophole, and as expected, there was no clarity on this episode, and I don't know why people are overreacting to this. I mean, the match was set up, it was promoted very carefully with a very specific set of words. Those words never said Tom Dagnino, they only said Finstock, and if you're a fan of this enterprise, you know that they've done the Finstock Tom Dagnino switch many, many times. They've treated them like separate people many, many times. So for people who think that he should be booted, I say no. He acted within the language that was provided to him.
I think Tom Dagnino is the smartest person that's ever lived. He creates a character that becomes an enigma, so much so that seasoned players such as Mark Andreyko, who have a wealth of knowledge, cannot help themselves but to want to be Finstock. He loves Teen Wolf so much that Mark and Draco had to become Bob Finstock. It's unbelievable what this guy can do.
I mentioned earlier that Ken didn't talk a lot in this episode. Well, Ellis even called reference to it when he said, "I'm glad I mic'd you up." But this came to a head when Justin from Chicago called in. This is the infamous phone call. Aaron, if you call into a podcast, especially a live podcast, a live show, what is your purpose for calling? And why do you think they asked you to call?
I would probably call in to maybe ask a question or join in the discussion of the panelists. Just my thought.
Well, Justin in Chicago called in, but he didn't think he had to ask a question. If you read the comment section of the Schmoes Know Show, number 269, Justin states that he didn't know he had to ask a question. That's why he had such a tough time thinking of one. So I'm still curious what Justin thought he was calling in for. Was he under the impression that he could listen to the show while on hold?
Maybe he has unlimited data.
So for some reason, Brett Sheridan was grumpy all night. I think the reminder of Dupree stealing his SAG screeners put him in a bad mood for the rest of the night.
Well, I think it's because Brett was actually supposed to watch Rogue One with Mrs. Sheridan as a screener, but once they looked in the mailbox, it was not there. So once again, Dupree strikes.
When you're getting shamed by Brett Sheridan for not being able to put together a coherent sentence, Mark Ellis said it best right there. Brett Sheridan was giving Justin in Chicago a very tough time. So Brett owes me an apology for the best friends thing with Ellis. He also owes Justin an apology as well. I think Brett's North Hollywood diet is the reason that he's so crabby these days. Anyway, Justin finally had a question, and boy did he ever. That question was, is it appropriate to take a date for a first date to a Chinese place? The room exploded. I've never heard Ellis laugh that hard in my life. Did you enjoy this moment, Aaron?
Partly. I found it partly funny, but I also wanted to know the answer because me being a married man, I don't really know a lot about today's dating world. So I wanted to know that perhaps if by fault my wife and I were to get divorced, hopefully that never happens, but if I were to go out with somebody else for a first date, should we go to a Chinese restaurant? Inquiring minds wanted to know.
Well, Mr. Ken Knapsack did an excellent job of responding to Justin's question, and it would be a disservice for me to paraphrase what Ken said. Needless to say, Justin has learned a very valuable life lesson. But Aaron, as far as your marriage goes, all you need to do is have a favorite restaurant and avoid Schmoes Know Show wheel games. It's really that simple.
Well, we did just get a roommate, so we'll see how that plays out, but I'll take your advice on that one.
Oh, so you inherited Dupree since Brett kicked him out of the house to film a reality show called Sharing Sheridan.
He brought a dog. It's weird.
So, Aaron, I've got to get something off my chest.
Okay.
I made a decision during this episode that I don't want to do this show any longer.
Okay. What? This is my first episode. Was it something that I said? Did I take too many shots at Cobster? Was I not deep enough? Was I not interesting enough? Is it me?
Look, as I told my last girlfriend, it's never you, it's always me. I came to this show in the middle of its run, episode 20, and I just expected to be a guest host. I never planned on being the missing piece to a hit show, but it just sort of happened. If you told a young Brian Davids that Kristian Harloff would someday lead off the Schmoes Know Show by saying, "Welcome to the Brian Davids Show," he would have said, "Yeah, I could see that." But at the end of the day, it just doesn't feel right to do this show any longer when it's somebody else's show that I inherited. And after seeing how burned out Snelling got after 50 episodes, I'm afraid I'll end up the same way since I've now done 30 episodes. Plus, Aaron, you've got another show that you're committed to. To ask you to watch 10 hours of Collider content every week on top of the Schmoedown and the live show is just too much. And even though I'm not a Patriots fan, after seeing Tom Brady win his 5th Super Bowl, I kind of want to go out on top.
The best always do.
I'm still going to watch Collider content. I'm still going to be a fan of Collider content, but I've said it all. I've said all I've needed to say. But boy, was it fun making corporate sweat every time we'd upload an episode. So I think I just want to return to my Schmoes Know roots. Aaron, is this something you'd even be interested in?
I think so, but what's the catch?
This time, it's official.
Are you saying, are you, for me, are you saying what I think you're saying?
Next week marks the premiere of After Schmo, the official Schmoes Know after show. Until then, I'm Brian Davids.
And I'm Aaron Turner.
And you're welcome for the ratings.